feels terribly nerdy to say, is the management end of things. It's learning how to play to the strengths and weaknesses of your crews and your suppliers and your subcontractors, and how to foresee things going wrong before they do.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Production Manager Ben Bogie for Kolbert Building and producer Jeff Rose. In addition to managing multiple projects for Kolbert Building, Ben presents at national trade shows demonstrating best building practices. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can also leave feedback and ask questions there too. Ben, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Are you guys healthy? Everything okay?
Yeah, family's well. Everybody in the business is well. Yeah, everybody's doing okay.
Are you guys able to work normally, or has that changed for y'all?
We had the fortunate position that when the COVID pandemic really started to pop up, as a company, we were in a position that we could kind of pump the brakes and step back from projects for a little bit just to see how things played out. So we've taken a bit of a self-imposed hiatus, but that's kind of wrapping up for us, and we are starting to get back in the field. We had a large project where we had single subs that were able to keep carrying on with some of the work on the project without us there, just doing general oversight. So it's we're not working normally, but we're making our way back towards working normally, I think. Whatever normal is.
Do you think that the pace of construction is going to pick up with the rapidity that it stopped? No. Because people are scared?
I think it's partially that. I think we have a lot of, outside market forces around us. Supply chains are being slowed down. People's workloads are going to shift as we get back into things. So scheduling's going to become an issue. So I think we're going to have some stumbling blocks there. But I'm optimistic that things will pick back up rapidly.
Can you tell us exactly what you do for Kolbert Building? What is your role there? Are you hands-on?
So my business card says production manager, and I guess what that means is when a project comes out of the office, though I do have input on it before it comes out of the office, I'm the person that makes it happen. So I'm involved in pre-construction, going over details and specs and so on and so forth, and just trying to do any of the pre-construction problem solving that we try and do on projects. But then once it leaves the office, I'm handling scheduling subcontractors, overseeing field operation, ordering materials, and I am hands-on, though that's only part of my time. So I do wear a tool belt. It might not be every day and it might not be all day, but I am still hands-on in the field.
How did you get into residential construction, Ben? Your dad was a builder, is that right?
Yeah, I'm second generation. So dad was a builder in Northwest Connecticut, was kind of an early adopter, very early adopter of high performance building back in the late 70s, early 80s. Around the time I was born, he was building some of the first super insulated houses in New England. That were being studied. So out of high school, I left high school early. I did my best to try and avoid a job in the trades, thinking, this is what I grew up doing. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. But people kept wanting to give me paychecks for, showing up to clean job sites and carrying lumber. So kind of by default, I fell into it. And
what did you imagine yourself doing if you weren't going to be in the construction business?
I have no idea. I never quite made it that far. I don't know. I wanted to be a chef for a while. I really enjoy cooking, so I did spend some brief stints working in kitchens, thinking that would be the direction I went. But that wasn't the right fit for me.
Tell me about your dad. What got him into high performance building? I mean, at the time frame he was doing that would have been largely unheard of, right?
It was. Yeah, he was very much so a pioneer in the area of adopting it. It was really the 78 oil embargo. My grandfather, you could kind of almost say that I'm a third generation high performance builder because my grandfather has a background in engineering and physics. He took a great interest in the work that Harold Orr was doing in Canada with the Saskatchewan Conservation House. some of that really early high performance building that was being done in Canada. My grandfather latched onto that and started researching the physics of what they were doing. And my father was a general contractor, so they were starting to have conversations about that and start to dive into it. The two of them traveled to Canada to study some of that stuff, and then up here into Maine to study with Charlie Wing back in the day and some of the stuff that he was doing early, and started to implement it to see if it was feasible. What ended up happening, as everybody knows, is that energy prices ended up dropping eventually, so the economic feasibility wasn't there. But he latched onto that stuff early, and those tenets and principles of the building science and insulation and airflow and stuff like that stuck with him throughout his career, and they were kind of just drilled into me. It was what we did. We paid attention to those things, and I never thought people didn't do it until I was old enough to realize that most of the people in the industry don't do those things.
And you have a feature in the current Fine Homebuilding. Am I correct?
Yep. We're on the cover this month. We were on the cover last month too, which is pretty exciting and humbling experience. We've got an article.
Can you tell us what is the feature in there for folks that might not have gotten it? We've heard there's been delays in the mail, so not everyone.
This month is installing engineered wood siding. So installing LP Smart Side and best practices to do that and follow manufacturers' recommendations for best practice installs.
Do you like that product?
I do, very much.
Yeah. What do you like about it?
I like the durability that it brings to a project, as far as how that it's going to stand up over time. I think it's kind of hard to beat, in all honesty, for how well it's going to perform over time. May not be the best fit for every project, but I think it's a really great project or product.
Portland, Maine has, at least for a couple decades, been a very progressive place with regard to high performance building, and it's a small city. Do you have any idea why it's become a hotbed of high performance building? What's going on there?
I think there's a couple of things at play. I think, like I mentioned before, Charlie Wing and that whole kind of back to the land hippie movement was here in the 60s and 70s, and they started to really dive into alternative building methods, if you want to put it that way, looking at doing mass and glass, passive solar building, and looking at doing high performance building with, super insulation, doing timber frame structures, straw bale structures, the things that were kind of really outside of the norm. So I think there was the groundwork set there. Everybody knows hippies are generally pretty frugal, so they were trying to, save as much money and be as ecologically conscious as they could. So that kind of set the groundwork up here. There's a great heritage of craftsmanship in this state, going back to shipbuilders. And then I think one of the big driving factors is in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the LEED program was really starting to take off. Portland was chosen as one of the pilot cities for the LEED for Homes program. So I think that really jump-started this area in particular and getting people to really pay attention to this, new wave of high-performance building.
Is the inspection process keeping pace with the more progressive parts of the country? Like, are you guys, as an example, do you have blower door testing, or are they requiring that?
So Maine is still kind of the wild, wild west in a lot of ways as far as code enforcement goes, but that's starting to shift. It wasn't too long ago that Maine didn't have a uniformly adopted building code. So in a lot of ways, the authorities having jurisdiction might not be super well educated on this building, but for the most part, we don't get any pushback. Sometimes we have to educate them, but overall, I think most of the code enforcement that we deal with in the Portland metro area is pretty hip to the practices that we're doing, but statewide, it's still pretty wide open. There's no mandatory blower door testing, but that's coming. They've not adopted many of the current IECC, International Energy Conservation Codes, but that is also changing here in this next code cycle. So it's been elective. A lot of this development that we've seen in progressive building here, it's been driven by market and by contractors and not by code. But we're going to see a big shift in that coming soon as the codes shift.
What version of the IRC are you guys building under presently?
2015 and 2018 in some sections, but they've removed the IECC. I think we're currently on 2009 IECC, but about to go to 2015.
And do you think that it's going to catch other builders flat-footed when these new requirements are enacted?
Yeah, I think it does. No matter where it happens in the country, it catches builders flat-footed. Having your first blower door test when you have one can be a humbling experience because you think you're building great, and then you see this little machine that gives you a number that shows you're not building so great. But we're doing things up here. The MUBEC Council, who adopts the codes, is looking at things like giving a 6-month grace period. So your first project or permits pulled in a 6-month period, you'll be able to blow or door and fail. But then any concurrent projects after that, you'll have to meet the standards. So it's going to take a lot of guys, flat-footed, as you say.
What do you what advice would you give those folks? Like blower door specifically, like I've tried to tell builders that doing a blower door test when the house is done is not when you do a blower door test. It's very difficult to fix things then. What do you tell folks who are facing that challenge?
This is a tough one. If you have a conscious and caring builder who's trying to do the best thing, my advice is to do it post-installation or pre-installation. I'm sorry. So as soon as your shell is essentially, closed in and you're preparing for installation, your mechanical trades have been through the building, so any damage is likely done. That's the time to do your first test, and that's when you can really affect improvements. After that, you're basically covering everything up. As soon as insulation starts going in, you're burying all those spots that you might be able to fix easily with a little bit of can foam or some caulk or tape or something like that, and it's kind of hard to backtrack from that point. So if there's a time to do it, it's then, right before installation, after your sub-trades have come through.
And do you guys do that testing yourself, or do you have a third party do your evaluations?
Yeah, we do it ourselves. I, at one point, a number of years ago, considered going into becoming an energy rater. So I was HERS certified at one point. I'm no longer current, but I do have my own testing equipment, so we do our own in-house testing.
And do you think that that's a valuable training for anybody, or is it too specialized for most folk?
What's that, going into energy rating or
learning to do the air tightness testing and other aspects of home performance?
It's very valuable. The short answer, it opens your eyes to a lot of things that are going on inside of a building and its assemblies that you might not normally think about or have been aware of before. After you do a few blower door tests, you start to see things as you're putting buildings together and realize that these are, critical spots that you might not have realized before, so you can address them easier. It just opens your eyes to a whole world of other interactions that are going on inside of the building. So blower door testing at a minimum, learning how to do that, or at least doing it and being part of it is, it's a tremendous learning experience.
From what I've observed, your company and you specifically, you're a generalist. You have a hands-on many of the aspects of construction projects. What's your favorite part of the process? What do you really get jazzed about and you look forward to before the day starts?
Earlier in my career, the stuff that I really, really got jazzed about and still do is, the fine finish work, the intricate trim and casework, millwork, that type of stuff. And I really do still love that. I'm sitting in a millwork shop here that's ours, that's full of equipment. I still love that part of the work. Now the stuff that really excites me is, and this is terribly nerdy, it feels terribly nerdy to say, is the management end of things. It's learning how to play to the strengths and weaknesses of your crews and your suppliers and your subcontractors, and how to foresee things going wrong before they do. That challenge is what really interests me now.
How do you teach someone that? How do you teach someone to see further down the road instead of just one step in front of you?
Let them mess up.
Really?
Yeah. That's really about all you can, you can lead a horse to water, but it does. You have to make those painful mistakes, and that's how you learn in this business. And that's why it's hard for young guys to go out and become general contractors and start taking on big projects because you don't know what you don't know yet.
Did your dad let you mess up stuff?
Oh, constantly. Yeah,
Yeah?
constantly. Yeah. He would,
Was he?
it's the same thing. He'd try and, warn me of things to come. And sometimes I'd, have had enough interaction with problems before to see what he was talking about and anticipate, what he was trying to teach me. But other times I just flat out ignore it, make the mistakes myself. And that's part of the experience, I make mistakes every day.
But isn't it expensive to let your team members mess stuff up, or suppliers mess stuff up, or subcontractors mess stuff up?
Yeah, but it's part of the business. You have to, on a business end, you have to anticipate those things. And that's where guys fall short in making accurate estimates, is they think everything's going to go perfectly. And they forget that, we might get a really rainy 2 weeks and now your job site turns to mud and everything, slows down and turns into a slog. And so you have to build in that protection into your business in order to be able to absorb those types of things. Otherwise, you're not going to stay in business.
I can't imagine a job site in Maine getting muddy and turning into a slog, dude.
You should have been up here in October, so you would have had a blast.
Matt Milham was telling me what that was like on your job site when he was up there.
Oh yeah, he had the best of it. It was ice and mud when he was there.
What do you think the biggest issue facing residential construction is now? Is it this current situation, or do we have bigger problems ahead of us?
I hope that this current situation is just a passing blip on the radar. It's just a little speed bump that we'll get over. I think that the biggest thing I see right now is just education across the board in all sectors of the industry: manufacturers, product reps, distributors, tradespeople. The building world is progressing so rapidly with building science and all these new materials and rapidly changing codes that it's hard for guys to keep up. We were able from 1940s or so up until the 90s to just kind of put everything on cruise control. We had a set method for how things were built and everybody knew how to do it. That's not the case anymore. So we have to find a way to get education out and make it accessible to anybody that's interested in an easily digestible form so that people can bring themselves up to speed.
What do you think the single biggest things we need to teach folks are? Like your top three, where are we lacking? And that's a hard question, I know.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Water management is still one of those continually a stumbling block. If we're talking about things to prevent failures in buildings and make buildings last longer, it's learning proper flashing techniques and understanding what you're actually doing with water management. So that would be my number one.
When you drive around Portland and see residential projects, do you like what you see? Do you see bad details? Do you see good details?
Yeah, so I do. I'm a transplant from Connecticut, right around where you guys are. And every contractor or carpenter, they drive past a job site and the hairy eyeball comes out. My wife tells me to calm down. It's not your job site before we even get close to it. But you analyze, and I can say moving from Connecticut to up here, Connecticut has a high level of craftsmanship. There's a very high level of craftsmanship up here. For the most part, I'm generally seeing, they might not be the products and assemblies I choose, but I generally see details being done right when I drive past job sites up here.
I wish I could say the same in my travels, but I see it as a mixed bag. Do you think that we're doing a good job training people? Like, obviously, you just mentioned that you see stuff done pretty well, but how are folks learning that?
I think it's regionally around here. I think it's because there's so many carpenters, so that it's competitive in that regards. I don't know how we teach people that. That's a big question right now. Everybody's concerned about the skilled labor shortage that we're facing as an industry, which is, I believe, a very real concern that we need to have. I don't think we need to push really to bring people in at the point. I don't think that's where our focus needs to be. I think that will inevitably happen. I think the market and the labor pool will drive us to people coming here, whether it's for better wages or for whatever multitude of reasons. I think, and this goes back to what I was saying, is we need to put out easily accessible forms of education across the board so that when we bring people on or people do have a desire to learn, there's resources for them to find it.
How did you learn? I mean, you mentioned watching your dad, but did you have training? Did you go to technical school?
For carpentry, no. No, I was a high school dropout at school. I was not a typical student. So the normal school format didn't work for me. I wasn't being challenged, so I dropped out early. I had no technical training. You know, I learned from on the job site experience. And then at a certain point, I went from just learning enough to get through my day to having an interest in actually learning more. So reading, watching YouTube videos, you know, this whole recent Instagram phenomenon is incredible resource for people to share and interact. You know, used to be just me reading through technical documents and stuff like that with nobody to talk to about it, to now we have this whole pool of, you know, across the world that we can discuss these things with and kind of, you know, counsel of our peers to see what really sticks and what makes sense. And I think that's a huge part of it. So it's just really diving into whatever aspect you're interested in at that time or you're facing on a project and just really going as far as you possibly can into learning everything you can about it.
What do you think are the best materials to learn your craft? What would you tell people who are trying to better themselves to pay attention to?
I don't think you can tell a person to pay attention to a certain thing. I think that has to be kind of self-directed. You have to become personally aware of what issues you might not know much about. So on a job site, if you're not really confident in installing windows, then go and read about installing windows. You know, go and watch YouTube videos about installing windows. And it's not that you're trying to find something that gives you the one perfect method, but just try and absorb as much material as you can, because then you'll be able to draw and infer from all of those things what makes sense for you.
Do you think that there are certain things that just a carpenter should know and like automatically? Are there certain skills that you mentioned installing windows? Is that something that every carpenter should know how to do, or is that something you train someone else to do?
It depends. It really, I hate to be so vague about these, but it really depends on what you're doing. You know, it depends on the crew and the business that you're a part of and what those things, you know, there's a lot of carpentry companies out there, contracting companies out there that don't install windows. The framers install the windows. So you might not need to know about that. It's really just being aware of what you need to do your job well at the time. And also still being curious about other parts of the business. You know, I have a tendency to go on tangents and learn about, like, you know, building horse-drawn carriages or something like that. Like going down a YouTube rabbit hole or like antique steam engines. I know you can relate to that, Patrick.
I can.
It's trying to absorb and, you know, just find things that might not be directly related to what you're doing in your job, but that interest you and that you're going to, through, you know, kind of osmosis, pick up, you know, understanding of the physical world around you to be able to apply to your job.
Mm. So what kind of house are you living now? What do you own? Do you rent? What I always ask this to our Pro Talk guests. Tell me about your house.
Yeah, so I rent currently. We're in an apartment and we are currently house hunting. I just had an offer on a house get turned down on Saturday, unfortunately.
I'm sorry.
1860s colonial. It's all right. They're paying more than the house will appraise for, so good luck to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're in the house hunting process right now, looking for something.
What do you want? What's your dream?
Oh, a giant barn and garage and a tiny little house with a lot of land. Whether I'm going to find that or not is I'm not so sure. But
do you hope to have a wood shop?
Not necessarily a wood shop, but at least a space to be able to do work, because I do intend on buying a house that I will do work on. So I need to have a space to physically be able to perform that work. And it would be nice if it had a roof over top of it.
Do you look for, I mean, would your preference be to have an older home or a newer home? Or doesn't it matter?
It doesn't really matter. I prefer to have a house with character.
Yeah.
And
what is it?
That just plays to my interest. I don't, no offense to the people that live in them, I don't want a raised ranch. I don't want the 1990s colonial. I want a house that, it will drive me to do something interesting to it.
And has field mice.
That's a given in my price range.
What is the missus and your little boy? Do you take them on the house hunting excursions?
Yeah. We were out driving around this weekend doing drive-bys on houses. The boy has, he's 3.5. He has no care as long as there's dinosaur toys and cookies there. He doesn't care where it is. But the wife and I generally have a similar affinity to houses.
If your little boy told you he wanted to be a carpenter or a builder, and maybe he has told you this, would you steer him that way? Would you want him to be a professional builder?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry to interrupt. I think this is, in a large view, plays a lot into what's wrong with our industry right now and why we have the skilled trades gap is that for the longest time, the trades were looked down upon as a second-class career choice. But especially now with the progression of building and the amount of information that you have to be aware of and the technology and the materials and the sciences, that's not the case anymore. You really have to be on top of your game as much as any professional does to do this job and do this job well. So yeah, if he was interested in it, I'd wholeheartedly support him in doing that.
So you're among the younger carpenters that I, talk with regularly, but I'm betting you still have the aches and pains that go with being a tradesperson. What about that aspect for your son? Do you have health problems, and do you think it's inevitable that a tradesperson has health problems because of their job?
Yeah, I've destroyed my body. I'm 38 now, and I have chronic pain and issues with my body from working in this industry. And I think it's a result of just working stupidly. I feel like I was part of the last generation that got to work with the old guard, if that makes sense. The old school mentality where it doesn't matter how heavy or awkward or dangerous it is, you just buck up and you get the work done, which teaches you a lot about self-reliance in this business and how to push forward and get things done. But it does, it takes a toll on your body. I find myself now not rebelling against those things, but for my crew, I pay a lot of attention to, what in the past I would have been made to carry alone, making sure that now 2 people carry it, and it slows the work down and it makes the work more expensive. But to me, there's no trade-off. I don't want anybody to be hurting themselves or injuring somebody else because of doing this work. So I'm hoping that as an industry, we see a shift in that, and we see people being, more caring and compassionate about the physical tax that we're putting on our body to actually perform this work.
Do you see that changing? I mean, in my observation, even the young folk in this business want to do everything, and they don't want help. Are we going to see a change in that regard?
I think it's a tough one to call, whether we will. I hope so. I do. I hope so. Because it is, like I said, I'm 38 and I'm paying the price already. I shouldn't have the pains that I do at my age, but.
On that cheery note, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to listen and talk with you guys.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thanks for joining us, Ben. Thanks to you, Jeff, for producing, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us. However you're listening, it helps other folks find the podcast. Stay safe, everybody, and thank you for listening.